Welcome to the Flynn Effect podcast, where we dive deep into all things culture, industry news, and history, all with the goal of helping our clients to perform better. Zach Frost, the name with the movie actor name, or what? The man with the movie actor name.
I'll take it.
Also, Flynn's director of integrated media. Welcome to the Flynn Effect.
Thank you.
It's
good
been
to be here.
a long time coming because people probably don't know that you are the curator of the content for the Flynn Effect newsletter. So we're often talking about, current events and what's going on in marketing and whatnot. So very appropriate to have you on now. But we're actually going to be talking about something specific today, which I know is sort of top of mind for you. And let's call it a passion, programmatic media buying.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I thought first, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background, like how you ended up at Flynn and how you ended up in marketing and media more specifically.
Yeah. So I got my start after I graduated college, actually at CGI in town. So I was doing like local SEO stuff that translated into paid search stuff. But I kind of knew in the back of my mind that there was kind of something bigger.
Yeah.
Just in the media world. I've always been fascinated with TV, radio, kind of other just forms of media in general. And also from just a personal setting, wanted to explore a little bit. So at the time, my wife and I said, hey, let's move.
Yeah.
Ended up down in Nashville. Spent 6 years down there.
Wow, longer than I thought even.
Yeah. So 6 years. Got my cut at an agency down there and kind of got into, call it the full media landscape. So, TV and radio planning and buying and kind of everything in between down to local print pubs and kind of all of that stuff. So that's kind of where I consider my true first start.
Sure.
Kind of a bigger agency job. I was in my early 20s, kind of just drinking from a fire hose, as most people do.
Yep, as we all
in this industry, and just kind of absorbing everything I could. Kind of moved up the ranks, with that agency from a media setting, and got more managerial experience and worked on kind of a wide variety of clients, everything from local restaurants to banking, national advertisers, really across different categories. So it was very fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it was traditional and digital media, right? So obviously your title is integrated media strategy here. And that's something that I feel like is becoming more and more commonplace. You got to know it all, whereas it used to be like very digital, very traditional.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you got to be dangerous in both.
Yeah, I think people look at it differently, and I think there's a lot of agencies that still separate it. There's agencies that are kind of combining those skill sets, if you will. But yeah, we were, from a media standpoint, full service in that regard, traditional and digital. I would say, something that I always tried to keep in the back of my mind is an old director of mine used to call it being T-shaped, which is a very common phrase where it's like, a lot about everything, and then you have a very deep understanding of kind of one thing or two things. So we kind of ran the gamut in terms of media, but digital was a very strong part of that.
That makes just total sense
with the timing.
Well, and it's a good segue too. I guess I hadn't even thought about it, because with programmatic, it's a lot of what you can buy, right, is actually traditional-esque inventory, but in a more digital buying way. So I don't know, maybe you could just, for those that don't know, like, what is programmatic? Why might marketers want to use it?
Yeah, so programmatic in its simplest form is an automated way to buy and sell media inventory. So think everything from, your display or banner ads to, streaming audio, programmatic out of home, to your point.
Yeah.
Most things now have found their way into the programmatic space,
right.
TV included, just with the fragmentation that we see in the streaming world and the way that you can buy things. But it's an automated way. You can obviously get very deep from an audience targeting standpoint. So there's ways to layer on, various types of, whether it be first party audiences or even third party audiences from, healthcare data providers, Visa is even a data provider. So from a retail standpoint, understanding, who's buying what, not down to the individual level, but it can
but it gets pretty specific.
Can be a little specific at times.
The affinity stuff gets pretty specific.
Yeah.
Which is, we've all seen like, oh, well, that feels awfully similar to something I was just searching yesterday.
Right. But yeah, basically all forms of media have now made their way into a programmatic setting.
Yeah.
So, as advertisers, as marketers, when you're putting together media plans or thinking about the best way to, market a product or a service, programmatic has become, not an initial starting point, but it has become a large piece of, I think, what a lot of people are doing because of that reason.
Yeah.
Just the accessibility, especially for smaller advertisers, who maybe can't get into national programming or, big time events. Programmatic has made it a little bit more accessible, even in that setting where you can do it on a local level and you can be really targeted from both a geo and an audience standpoint and really access various types of inventory across different channels, which is nice.
Yeah. And for that reason, this is probably a sort of complicated question, but like, does it tend to be more expensive if you are layering on specific audiences and specific geos? I would imagine yes, but
it honestly, it depends. I think in the programmatic world, like anything, as media buyers, you should have to be careful about what you're buying and where you're buying it. I think we've all probably heard horror stories or client stories where it's like, oh, I ran in this site, and that's not necessarily appropriate.
Right, brand safety and all of those things.
Brand safety becomes a large concern, and there's protocols that you have to have in place to make sure that you're avoiding that kind of stuff. But I would say in general, it tends to be a little bit cheaper, or a little bit more affordable than, maybe purchasing linear television, or it all is dependent on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and what we're comparing it against.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that makes sense.
And as of late, that trend might be going the other direction, just depending on, high level sports inventory or things like that. So it's very dependent on what you're trying to do. And I think that's kind of the fun part about our job is, being efficient in what we're doing, but also getting into premium type content.
Right. Well, and I think that the evolution, if you will, of programmatic has also really evolved the job of media planners and buyers and placers, right? Like even 5 years ago, it's much more commonplace, I feel like, and everybody has a DSP relationship from an agency perspective. And I think people understand it a lot more. So I get this question sometimes from clients and just when we're talking in general around here, like, how do you think AI is going to continue to evolve, agencies and your roles and whatever? Media is actually one place where that's been happening for a really long time. And programmatic's a great example of tapping into that type of intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when AI kind of made its push onto the scene, more from like a ChatGPT, generative type AI. I think in the media world, we were thinking, well, wait a minute, this has always been here, because platforms that at least we're in on a daily basis, whether it be Google, Meta, in a programmatic space, right? Behind the scenes have always had that,
right?
And it's made targeting buys a lot easier and a lot more accessible, and it's made buying, whether you're talking about things like bid shading, which is something where if it's a $45 CPM, for example, you can kind of have settings that says, okay, I'll pay 45, but if that impression's cheaper, I want to win it for 40. So there's things like that where, behind the scenes AI and automation is doing that, and we're kind of, controlling that from a front end perspective.
Right. Well, and I think it's great too, because then those of you who are in media roles can focus on slightly different stuff, because it used to be there was somebody in there making changes all day, every day. And now we get to look at it on a little bit more of like a macro level in terms of, okay, how is this all performing? How does it feed into our clients' business goals? What adjustments do we need to make on a, larger scale? But, at the same time, I totally get that takes away some of the like, get your hands dirty and really get in there stuff. But.
Yeah, I would say that side of it definitely hasn't changed. I would say, myself, our team, we're in the platform, daily, several times a week at the bare minimum. Maybe not making as granular changes like you mentioned, but certainly looking at things and making sure that we're generating the outcomes that the buy is supposed to have.
Oh, yeah.
But yes, it does give us a little bit more time to spend on the strategy side. So from a performance perspective, it gives us a little bit more time to really dig into the whys and kind of the what's next, versus trying to just dig out, how is this happening? It gives us a little bit more time on the insight part of it, which is nice.
It's a great tool from our perspective. Okay, so part of the reason why we thought we would talk about this today is because you just recently got back from a conference last week. You went with the DSP that we use, which is Basis. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and sort of what the focus of the conference was.
Yeah. So I was in Chicago last week. First time in Chicago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Zach, it's like an hour and a half flight. You gotta get over there again. It's great. I love Chicago.
Yeah, it was great. I've been to New York City, obviously lived to Nashville for a while. I would have to say it ranked pretty high on my list of cities.
Oh, it's a beautiful city. Like the architecture is amazing. It's super clean. It's well thought out.
Yep.
I actually really love it there.
Yeah, it was great place. I didn't get a ton of time to explore, but went to Millennium Park, which is kind of like maybe not their version of Central Park, but similar.
I saw your photo of the bean.
Yep. Got to see the bean. Very cool. Kind of, walked around that whole space. But yeah, the Basis conference was last Thursday. Very cool conference. So it was mostly agency folks. So I was mostly with, my peers around the industry. And something that I thought was super cool, the way that they began the conference, called a keynote or, whatever you want, is they took a look at the, 25-year history of just technology and, how that relates to digital media. And, it started off with the fact that going online used to be a time and a place. You kind of reserve time. You were going to a desktop computer, whether that be a library or a specific room in school or a specific office at home or, whatever the case may be. And you had to go online.
Oh my God. Remember when you would accidentally hit the browser button on your flip phone and be like, oh my God, it's going to cost $11 per second.
Yep. Parents are going to be bad.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that all too well. But yeah, so, when you did those things, it was easier to disconnect and go back to the real world.
Right.
You did what you had to do, whether that's online shop or do research for a project, whatever the case may be. As soon as you were done with that and logged off, you were now offline and back into the real world, to where now, the 2000s, 2010s, brought cell phones and accessing internet and social media, to devices that we carry around every second of every single day. So now we're online constantly, and just how that's changed for advertisers.
It's a whole different world.
Yeah, I mean, a lot more simple to maybe run some display impressions or banner ads to a desktop computer that someone's going to log on to at certain hours of the day, to where now, there's several social platforms, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of websites that we can all access with a device in our pocket. So just the battle for engagement or getting in front of people is a lot different, right? I think it kind of went from, call it a disruption industry where, we were just kind of trying to get in front of and kind of disrupt or engage with people in that moment in time, to now it's a little bit more challenging because you're trying to integrate more with people's daily lives.
And people are so inundated with information. It's like, how do you break through all of that?
Right. There's a lot. There's a stat out there. I don't have it off the cuff, but we engage with hundreds of ads on a daily basis.
Right.
Between TV, out of home, digital, social.
And you probably don't even clock half of them.
Yeah. So call it the fight or the battle for attention is a lot harder these days.
Right. And it's not reasonable for us as agencies to have relationships with all of those different publishing sites. And we have relationships directly with a lot of them. But to your point, there are just so many now. So that's why, companies like Basis are very helpful in terms of that inventory.
Yeah. And to go back to the programmatic side of it, like that's the part of it that becomes nice, whether you're using something as simple as a site list that has 30 to 50 sites on a local level, local news, local newspapers, things like that. You can kind of control that inventory, or if you're trying to run something national, there's ways to access all of those sites from a display standpoint, or in the OTT world or CTV space, whether you want to run on Hulu or things like that. All of that is accessible right in the platform,
all in one place,
which makes it nice.
Makes total sense. Well, awesome. So in terms of like trends or what's upcoming or new features or anything that stood out to you?
So agentic AI was thrown around a little bit. AI is the hot topic.
It's the thing.
It is the thing. So that was discussed a little bit. But really just, my biggest takeaway was how we evolve for the next 25 years, really from a tech and a media standpoint. One of the pieces that the keynote addressed was just how consumers don't always come along for the ride at first. So when there is something new, especially in the tech space, there's always the early adopters who jump on board, think everything is awesome. But then there's also the people who are a little bit more reserved, a little bit pessimistic of, well, is this for me? How is this going to be beneficial for me? And, I think the way that they described it is really what marketers do on a daily basis. It's providing the value of, why this is helpful.
Right.
And until you can translate that in an efficient way to people, I think people are going to be naturally cautious of certain things.
A little skeptical. That makes sense. I mean, and I think in this case, agencies, not all agencies, but a lot of agencies tend to be the early adopters, in that customer set. And then I think, larger companies in corporate America tend to, there are some that are really on the cutting edge. And then of course there's, some that just have a lot of red tape and it takes a while to get those new things through. So it makes total sense. It's funny you just said that. I had a memory hit my brain. I'm actually like not an early adopter. I require a tiny bit of push. Like every time Teams comes out with a new whatever iteration, I'm like, I don't want it to change. Like I know where my buttons are, whatever, all that stuff. But growing up, I remember when the first iPhone came out, my dad paid me and a friend to like camp out outside of a Verizon or something to get him the first iPhone, because he's always been very much so like, I want the latest and greatest stuff. Especially from Apple, just like always loved what they put out there. But remember standing out there. That's probably why I'm averse, because it was hot and tiring.
And that's the exact point that they were kind of trying to get across is eventually, whether with Teams you're kind of forced to just adapt and move on, but eventually, generally as a society and as consumers, we do evolve into using whatever that new technology is. And it's different time for different people,
right?
Again, you've got early adopters, you've got maybe people who jump on board years later, but typically that shift is inevitable. And it's something that you kind of just have to roll with.
I know, who'd have thunk we'd all be attached at the hip to our phones. But I don't think there's any putting that horse back in the barn.
No, good and bad. It's good and bad.
Yeah. All right. Well, any other final thoughts or unexpected insights or just favorite moments from the conference that you would want to share?
Yeah. So in the afternoon session, you kind of got to pick and choose your own journey. So there was a strategy session, new business, and then leadership. I chose to do the strategy session. And I would say just, being and talking with others in the industry is, half the reason that anyone goes to those things.
Totally.
Just being able to sit in a room with like-minded people who are doing the same things you're doing on a daily basis is very powerful.
Yeah.
Whether that's bouncing ideas off of people, whether that's, just seeing how different people operate and just their viewpoints on how to run programmatic advertising, is extremely helpful.
Totally.
So I would say, had a lot of confidence in, what we're doing currently, which is always good.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of very good things, but also, had some perspectives that were shared where it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to approach that, whether it's a new feature in the DSP, or whether that's a feature that, maybe we're just not utilizing for a certain reason, that could be helpful for us in the future. But always fun just to get in a room and, talk with your peers and
I agree.
And see what everybody's doing.
That's why I love Magnet. Magnet's a global agency network that we belong to, and so it's like 30 some odd agencies, and it's the same thing. It's like it's people who own or are principals of agencies, and it's just so helpful to talk to people who day in and day out do exactly what you do, right? Because you might have a couple of people here, but the Flynn experience is very different than experience of agency X and agency Y, and depending on region and size and client makeup and industry and all the things. So yeah, we were talking earlier, like it's always equal parts reassuring and inspiring / terrifying to go to those types of things. But I feel like you always walk away with a lot of new ideas and fresh perspective to, bring to the agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Any final parting thoughts to share?
I can't say that I have any.
Who are you rooting for the U.S. Open this weekend?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Is that what you're doing for Father's Day?
Yes, I will be. I will be watching when I can.
Yeah.
Probably while chasing children.
Right.
I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm a big Max Homa fan.
Okay.
It's hard to not bet against Scotty though.
Yeah.
He's just got it going on right now.
Yeah. I've seen some videos Ben Griffin was posting on TikTok of like how long the rough is.
Yeah.
Doesn't look fun.
May have tuned into the Golf Channel yesterday at one point, and they were kind of doing a breakdown of just, it was giving me PGA Championship vibes when it came to Oak Hill.
My gosh, yeah, that was tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually, so I interned there when it was here in 2013.
Yeah.
And kind of a quick funny story, but it was about 10 to 15 interns. It was all like hospitality focused. So we were in like the corporate chalets and suites. And, I think at one point I gave like a golf cart ride to like the president of Mercedes.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, this is
casual.
Fun. Yeah. But one of the interns actually dropped her keys on our way out one night in the rough as we were walking home. And we were down there with flashlights, and it probably took us almost an hour to find her keys.
Oh gosh,
and they
that's
were
terrible.
2 feet away.
Yeah.
But it's real.
Yeah, no, I'm not envious of them, but I'm sure it'll be a fun watch.
Yes.
Well, I hope you enjoy your Father's Day, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure to be on.